Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. Hey guys, before I get to our first guest, I just want to take a moment today and thank Pepperball. You know, they've been a sponsor of the Prison Officer Podcast for more than 3 years, and without their sponsorship, I wouldn't be able to bring this content to you. We wouldn't be able to have these great conversations with these leaders and trainers in corrections. You know, I used Pepperball for more than 20 years when I was working in the institution. It was something I believed in. So it was easy for me when I got the chance to become a master instructor for Pepperball. I get to go out and train law enforcement and corrections, and I get to see you guys in the field. So I really appreciate that. The great thing about Pepperball is it gives the officers the confidence to have a tool that they can use that they know is going to work. If you would, reach out to Pepperball. www.pepperball.com, and thank them for sponsoring the Prison Officer Podcast. And while you're there, see all the new things that are part of the Pepperball family. Hello, and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name is Mike Cantrell. Today, I've got Joshua Ryle. He started off, or has worked for, the Tennessee Department of Corrections, the Davidson County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Department of Corrections, and is currently working at the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. We met during some recent training, and we had a talk, and he had some pretty cool ideas on, some of the stuff they were doing there, and I wanted to talk to him about it. So welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. This second season, I've been trying to focus a little bit more on training. I think that's one thing that all of us in corrections can improve on, and I think it's probably the number one most important thing that we can do for our culture and our agencies. So I'm excited to talk about that, but I always start off at the same way. I like to learn about the person I'm talking to.
Absolutely.
So if you can let us know where you grew up and, high school and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. I was born and raised there in the music industry, the country music industry. My father was an entertainer, or is still currently. And he got picked up by Mel Tillis in the mid-'80s. And that kind of just sent a roller coaster of events, of moves to Nashville, Tennessee. And so I moved to Nashville as a teenager, and I spent all my teenage years. I went to high school at McGavock High School. Also went to high school at Nashville Academy.
Right.
So long story short, I ended up, spending all my youth in Nashville. And one day he moved up to Clarksville, Tennessee, and he told me that if I ever came up here, I'd never leave it. And I'm thinking, now, this is a city boy that grew up in Dallas and Nashville, and you're telling me to come to little Clarksville, Tennessee. Well, I moved out here, and I did. I came out, I fell in love with the place, and I've been here almost 20 years since.
Great.
So, but kind of what got me into this field, as far as that goes, is during my high school, during my senior year, I had my first child, my daughter, Hope. She's 27 now.
Nice.
And I left school. I was in a kind of a co-op program. So I was working 4 hours a day and then school 4 hours a day, getting high school credit for work credits. And I ended up leaving that year to go to work full time. And so I did. And at the time, I remember I was working for a Taco Bell. And I went to my boss and I said, I just left high school. I had 6 months to go, and I'm having a little girl and I need to go to work. And so he immediately bumped me to a shift manager. And so in 1998, I was a shift manager at Taco Bell, and my daughter came in to be. And what's funny is I did well in that field. I moved up, decided to change venues. So I went over to Captain D's as a senior assistant manager, and then Jack in the Box comes to town, and I knew everything there was to know about Jack in the Box because I'm from Dallas, Texas. So I go up there, interview with them, and they hired me, and I became part of a management team that opened 6 locations. And during that time, the vibe was on me. I remember growing up in high school, and I remember hearing things like, if you don't finish school or if you don't succeed and graduate, it was never the fearful end of, well, you could end up, selling drugs, or you could end up doing these things. It was more focused on, you'll flip burgers at McDonald's, demeaning an honest living.
Right.
And, there was that stigma that went with it, and it kind of haunted me because I remember growing up with that. And so I had a friend of mine, I was 21, and I hadn't seen him since high school. And he rang my doorbell. And when I opened the door, his name was Ken Ford. He just recently passed away. But I owe him everything as far as this field goes, because he was standing on my doorstep in a Tennessee Department of Correction uniform. And he was working for Riverbend Maximum Security Prison.
Okay.
I just remember looking at him and I thought, okay, wait a minute. How did you get this job? And how do I get into it? Because he looked like he had purpose. And that's what I feel like I was lacking at the time, Yeah,
Right.
I took on the responsibility to raise a family, but I wasn't fulfilled. And so he gave me the process. And to give you an idea of how eager I was, back then you had to go down to Dedrick Avenue, downtown Nashville, and you had to test for the position.
Yep.
So I took the test, and they said, you did well, you passed. Now you're going to receive letters in the mail from prisons across the state, and they'll schedule interviews and things of that nature. I've always been one that lacked patience. And so I told them, I said, I don't have that kind of time. Where's your closest prison? And they were like, well, that's not usually how things are done. And I was like, well, nonetheless, where's it at? And so they told me about Cockrell Bend, and there were 3 prisons side by side, MTRC, Riverbend, and DeBerry. And so I just went to the first one. So I walked into checkpoint. There was a checkpoint officer. I asked to speak to anyone in their HR. I remember an older gentleman, retired military. His name was Jim Omnivet, lieutenant. And he came around, and I introduced myself, and I told him, what I was trying to do. And I think that he might have kind of been taken back by my how direct I was
Boldness.
being. Yeah, that was pretty bold to walk into a prison saying, I need a job.
Sure.
Government jobs don't usually go down that way. But it was funny. He interviewed me, and, you got to do the background check and everything before you take the test back then. And so I was literally on a bus to Tullahoma the very next week, where I went to the academy. They hired me. And I remember experiencing the structure of that. And, when you grow up in the music world and your father's an entertainer, structure is something that I was lacking.
I could see that.
So I went in, I graduated their academy, and I remember walking into the facility, and this is at Middle Tennessee Correctional Complex. It was a reception center. So this is the first place people go when they come from the county jails. We classify them, and then, within the next 90 days, we'll ship them off to time building facilities. And I remember walking in there, and I was just all about it. I wanted to learn any and everything I could. And I was very fortunate that they threw every ounce of training. If I requested, they just gave it.
Right.
Back then, people who hired on, this is 2001 now, so we're talking almost 25 years ago.
Yeah.
We had a lot of retired military, a lot of older generation that were filling those spots. And so to get some, young kids our age coming in there and just eager to show up and just want to be a part of something, they were very receiving of that. And they really took care of me. And I was so taken back by them. I worked there for almost 4 years. And then I decided to head county and, try detention. And so that's how I ended up going to Davidson County Sheriff's Office. And I was with them for about 3.5 years. And I wasn't very career minded. I was money minded. So I was chasing who paid better, in my early 20s. And then I heard about the unlimited overtime opportunity at DeBerry Special Needs Mental Health Facility, level 4.
Yep.
And so when you come to them with 7 years experience, your post is the mental health unit. And so I was a set relief post within that mental health unit within 7 Charlie Bravo, and Foxtrot.
Right.
And I gave them about 2 years of the mental health at that level was about all I could muster up. And
It's a tough job.
Yeah, it really was. That was of any chapter of my life, that was probably the most beneficial 2 years of my future going forward and dealing with mental health inmates. And, kind of being able to decipher the difference between disciplinary and mental health crisis.
Right.
And so in 2010, I put in to apply at Montgomery County, and they picked me up. I remember speaking to the individual that interviewed me, and, he mentioned that they were on the same retirement as Nashville at TDOC. And I said, if you give me an opportunity, I'll never leave. And here we are all these years later. May of next year, I'll have been in corrections for 25 years.
Nice.
And so yeah, I've been with Montgomery County now 16 years.
Yeah.
So
did you start with Montgomery County as an officer? Or?
I did. I started out as a deputy. I was promoted to FTO within the first 2 years, back when it was initially a separate rank. Then I promoted up to corporal a year after that. I was corporal for multiple years before I ended up taking a transfer. My kids were getting older and I wanted to kind of be on some normal hours. I've been working nights and swing shift, since 2001.
Yeah.
So I decided to give the courts a try, and I went and worked courts for almost 2 years. And during all that time, I've been adjunct training, so as an extra to fill in, and I'd done that since about 2000. And an opportunity came to promote up into full-time. And that's what led us to where we're at today, and that's been almost 4 years.
Cool. I want to back up just a little bit, and this is for my own personal knowledge. I work with Command Presence, and we've recently started up the Correctional Training Officer program. Yes. So tell me about your FTO program. What did that consist of? What were the timelines? Because, as I went to study and started to build this program for Command Presence, I did some study across the United States. There is nothing written in stone anywhere. It is all over the place. Some of them, we're talking less than a week. We've got probably at the most I saw was 4 weeks, which is crazy when you think about the fact that to become a wildlife officer in Texas, you're going to go through a 15-week academy. You're going to go through an FTO program for 6 months, and you're going to take almost a full year of training to become a wildlife officer. But yet we're going to throw people in corrections just bam, bam, bam. So I'm interested, and this is on a personal note, but I'm interested on the timeline of the FTO program that you worked in. How did that work? Can you talk to me about that?
Well, it grew substantially over the years. We've been very fortunate. The initial start is 4 weeks of initial training with me and my partner in training. I call her Action Jackson.
Now, is this after the academy?
No, this is initial. So for corrections.
Institutional.
Yeah. And so they'll spend 4 weeks with us, and then they go into an FTO process of 7 weeks. Where, of course, they're graded on a daily basis, observed, kind of polish up where we need to polish up, recognize the things that are going well until they have a formal graduation at the completion.
Are they staying with a FTO or a CTO that entire time?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That 7 weeks with an FTO, that's not, you don't find that everywhere. That's a pretty good program.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
We really have.
So, you get in there, and now you are the fresh. What's the role? I forgot.
I'm a training sergeant, so a sergeant in the training division for the correction side under TCI, Tennessee Corrections Institute.
And there's 2 of you working there at Montgomery County in that position. Okay. How many officers, or how many deputies? Or
you would ask me that.
Just generally.
I want to say just shy of 200.
Okay.
And that's figurative. That's more of a guess, because I have not looked at the count yet or lately. But that's about average.
Right.
So yeah.
So tell me about the training program. What all do you guys do for Montgomery County?
Well, we do everything from firearms to defensive tactics to emergency response, law, of course, the ins and outs of our policy and procedure and things of that nature, de-escalation, just all the big topics that we do. And then when I came into the position, that's kind of led us to where we're at. I remember I got promoted on a Friday. And my partner came up and showed me my work area. And I thought, man, what a nice work area. And it was all so neat and, presentable. And then I went over and looked at her work area and I said, what's all that? She said, that's your workload. And I was like, okay, what have I done? Welcome to the world of training. But she had mentioned, she said that she had been carrying the load of two of us, waiting for the process, the selection process for someone to come in and give her a hand. And she said, I am under a deadline and I need a class for in-service. And I said, okay. And she said, I need it by Monday. And I said, Jax, it's Friday. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to give you a laptop. And I said, okay. How long do we need? And she said, 2-3 hours. And I said, wait a minute. You want me to come up with a training worth its salt that are going to keep people focused and interactive in 2 days, but 3 hours of material? And she's like, yeah. I was like, okay. And she goes, the good news is subject matter of your choosing.
Right.
And then I thought, okay. So I have always been someone that what really, I don't know, that you have some people that are defensive tactics nerds. You have people that are book nerds. I am a human behavior nerd. What just blows my mind, I love to study why we behave the way we do, specifically in our field. Because there are reasons why. Okay. And a lot of times we don't we don't look at the reasons why. And so I decided to start digging. And so I did. Went home. I worked on my own time at my house. And I mean, it was hours and hours just to get enough to get through Monday, because I knew it was going to grow bigger and bigger. And so I started focusing on common problems in corrections in general, not agency specific, because no matter what agency I've ever worked for, we have some very commonalities in corrections culture across the board. It didn't matter whether I was working at the state prison or for any county facility. There were behaviors amongst, as far as ourselves, that we start to develop over time that kind of feed this end time statistic of officer wellness and things of that nature.
So give me specific examples.
Okay. So I remember multiple times, I've been to several wellness trainings over the years, and the statistics that plague the corrections field: divorce, suicide, alcoholism, drug addiction. We die early. When we retire. I think the last statistic I read was less than 5 years after retirement. These are things that I've always wondered why, what feeds that. And of course, over time, as I've worked in the field, I know that the high stress, high speed, low drag, constant moving, constant interaction with the inmate population, and not to mention fellow staff members too. There are things that we pick up along the way that we don't even know is happening. And my whole approach to that was, well, what if we could take a proactive approach? Why not? Corrections historically has been a very reactive field. When things happen, we react, we change policy, we change training. Absolutely. But there's also some areas that we could be more proactive. And so I wanted to focus on the first part of the training. It was the initial, this was all it was ever going to be, was I wanted to focus on workplace toxicity.
Okay.
And what were some of the things that...
Tell me what that means. Tell me what we're talking about here.
So, for example, when you look at the statistics of officer wellness and you see all of those topics that I just threw out,
Mm-hmm.
during early training, these were kind of synonymous with people who had spent a lifetime in corrections, and this was our end result. Things
Okay.
to be aware of, things to watch out for. Okay. But whenever you start to ask the questions of, well, what feeds that? And you start talking about the high stress or maybe some of the trauma that we've interacted in along the way. Well, what does that say for the 1 to 5 year employee we're seeing these statistics on, and they're not at the end of their career?
Right.
5 years ago, they come into our line of work and they can't wait to put your uniform on. They're so excited. And now all of a sudden, we're seeing wellness issues. We're seeing divorce. We're seeing alcoholism. We're seeing these things happen at a much faster rate. And that was kind of what fed the prequel to the training. So, but those same things that feed that were the same things that start to change how we interact with each other. So, for example, some of the things that I went into were, from the moment that we come into this field, things start happening, things start changing. And in the beginning, you look at it and it's the things that are changing in us that make us really good in our field. We start to develop things like an investigative mindset, what it means to be security minded, to be aware of your surroundings, having that situational awareness. These are all great things that
Not
make
just
you really
awareness,
good.
it becomes hypervigilance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you look at that and you think of these things that when you're constantly dealing with your inmate population and you're constantly trying to get to the bottom of whatever it is you're dealing with that day, whether it be, fights, floods, or just daily manipulation, when you leave the world that you've lived in your entire life, for the most part, it's trustworthy until given a reason not to. But then you enter a world that's 100% manipulation and you start to pick up some different characteristics. And what I've noticed is those things that make us really great at that, they start to become part of our DNA as we continue on in our career. And then we start using those same concepts to deal with each other.
Right.
Now, that can be a problem, okay? Especially then, because if this is the same process that you're interacting with colleagues, now your inmate population, your colleagues who you are spending more time with than your family, do you not think that these same things are going to go home and now you're going to interact with family the same way?
Right.
So, for example, some of the things, just the common things that we kind of laugh about as far as behaviors go in corrections, when you have to deal and live in that investigative mindset 100% of your workday, what it does is it starts to train you to assume the worst in the person that you're dealing with, whether it be staff, inmate, family, doesn't matter. And it's a habit that's hard to break because you don't even know what's happening. And so, for example, when somebody calls out sick on you as a supervisor, the first thing out of most people's minds that have spent a lifetime in this career isn't, well, I hope they feel better. It's they just didn't want to come to work, assuming the worst.
Right.
For example, it kind of strays our priorities. I used to ask this question to people as I've taught this class across other counties and other places. And I always ask the question when it comes to priority, just to kind of show how that assumption changes for the worst. I said, if I'm your colleague and something is happening that is life-threatening and you have to get to me to save my life, how many of you are going to do it? And Mike, I'll get 100% hands in the air. Yeah, we got you, brother. And you know why? Because that's what we do. That's when we perform at our best. Okay. Well, then I say, okay, so now let's flip the script just a little bit. Now you're my relieving shift and I didn't get all my showers and my rec done. And now you got to pick up my slack. God help me. Right. Because it couldn't be because I got busy. It's because I had to be sitting around doing nothing because we're assuming that that's a performance issue. And there's always been very little forgiveness in performance issues and corrections because we don't have a lot of room for error. And so essentially we're saying, yes, we'll save your life, but we won't help carry the load. And it's funny to see that light bulb go off on people and they go, oh my gosh, I've done that. And what's funny is the whole time that we were putting this together, as I was sitting there putting in these details and looking these things up, I realized here I thought I was on a soapbox. I was guilty of every single one of them. And then it just intrigued me even more. I wanted to know, well, where does that come from? How does that start? So it was funny. The first time I taught it, I remember, it's hard. You can go teach in another area and the interaction is very different than when you teach at home, because your colleagues have seen you at your worst. They've seen you have those bad days. And now here we are talking about how to address, a workplace toxicity and how to not let it overcome all facets of your life. And I remember I got up there in front of these folks and I was looking around the room and I thought, this is going to be a tough one, because there's a lot of positivity in it. But instead of tackling individuals, it was more of just tackling the behaviors and showing where they come from and then how to change them, how to pivot and move into something a little more healthy. And I got done with that class. We taught for almost 3 hours. And I remember having colleagues that have been in double digits come up to me and they said, why have I been in this line of work this long? And that's the first time I've ever heard that discussed.
Right.
And the response was, I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize those behaviors that I was picking up and talking about the topics of it, like negative filtering, self-sabotaging behavior, where over time we learn to self-criticize instead of self-reflect. And, in dealing with the two, one doesn't allow growth and one does.
Right.
And historically we dwell in our mistakes and that's what we do. We self-criticize, which is why that cycle just kind of keeps repeating itself. And so after getting that initial response, I knew, especially from some of the individuals that I got it from, I knew I was on to something that was for the good of our culture. And that was the goal, was to just show a different perspective on corrections culture and show people that our culture is controlled by ourselves.
Right.
Now, I may not be able to change you as an individual, but I know somebody inspired me to make change in myself. And if I can do the same and inspire that want, that need to make a change, to bring a little more positivity to what you do for a living, because I think that one of the most important things to teach people in this field, if you want to teach people to take pride in the purpose that they serve, they got to know why they matter in the first place. And I can't tell you how many times when I started early in my career, Mike, I used to hear people tell me all the time, well, you're not the real police.
Right.
Well, telling me that doesn't help me grow better in my field.
So where is that coming from? Is that a lack of training? Is it a lack of leadership? Is it a lack of, where is that feeling coming from? That, that you're not worth whatever, that you're not as...
I don't know if I would call that a lack of anything. I think it was just historical corrections. I remember being 21 years old and having colleagues just say, all we are glorified babysitters. I used to hear them demean that. And
that's culture.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so I wouldn't say it was like a lack of leadership or training. I think it was just common culture. And I heard those things at every area of my career. And, what's funny is my response anytime I ever heard that, I said, regardless of your faith, we can agree that we get a good go around at this. This is the road that we chose. This is what we chose to do with it. And I just can't fathom doing something at a mediocre level without all my passion and all my drive. It's my one go around. I know I have to believe that every one of us have some purpose more than just thinking that you just go to work every day and punch a clock.
Yeah, but I'm going to have to, I guess I'm going to have to push back a little bit on this, because I absolutely think it's leadership. If your employees won't have that if they feel valued. Now, whether that's supervisory or whether that's administration, but, being a servant leader, letting people know that you care, letting people know that they're worth something, that comes from the top down, and the opposite also comes from the top down. I worked for a warden very early on at Springfield, Missouri, and I have never met anybody that hated line staff as bad as he did. And his leadership oozed into that institution to the point that the only thing that the inmates and officers had in common was that they hated that man. Yeah.
Well, and I think I'll add to that too, though. If that's the culture that he came up in that field in, he wouldn't know any different either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I
guess.
Well, if you stop and look at it, if the culture never changes, and like I said, from 01 throughout my entire career, it's improved, but you still have those pockets of just folks that, and you're going to have them everywhere in every walk of life. But it seems like in corrections, it seems to be a little bit amplified as far as just the amount that you deal with on a regular basis. And now what's funny is when you see these folks come in, they didn't come in with that attitude. They came in ready and eager to take on the world. And after about 6 months to a year, we start to see these changes. And it's like, wait a minute, what's happening? There's something about culture that's affecting this, because they didn't come to us this way. But what it does mean is if they learned it, they can unlearn it. If you can learn that behavior, you can learn a better behavior.
Yeah. I ticked off a guy in a training about a month ago. Because here's what I told him about culture, because he was sitting in the back with his arms crossed while I'm teaching, and we were talking about a use of force, and in this situation, the sergeant had taken the time to pull everybody back out. We'll get our stuff in order, and now we'll go back in. I said, that's the safest way to do that, and he pops off, well, they should have just went in there and stomped him. They should have just. So, whoa, I said, safety and liability, that's what we've got to take a look at. And he just kept going, and he started talking about culture. And here's what I told him. I said, if you don't like the culture, and I'll tell this to anybody in corrections anywhere, if you don't like the culture where you work, go look in the mirror. You're the culture. Every day you set an example. Whether you set a bad example or a good example is up to you. And that's for the staff. You're setting an example. That's for the inmates. You're setting an example. So I'm so
glad you said that.
Well,
the reason I say that, Mike, because that's the response I give. As a matter of fact, even when I was at that last training with you in Nashville.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking to people that say they want a better quality officer or a better quality deputy, as far as the younger generation. And I don't know if you remember what I said at that event, but my response was, what behaviors are you giving them to emulate? If you want better, then you got to make sure that you're giving them something to be. You are the one that they mold themselves after, because you are the one they report to. And so if you're putting that out, you'll get a better quality. People are worth the investment mentally and physically. It's not just enough to train the mission. The life lessons that we've learned over the years that maybe have been lost in technology times, well, then the onus falls on us that we have to be the ones to go ahead and give them those lessons to make them more effective at what they do and to help the mission.
Right.
And so
I think the other thing that we need to take a look at when we talk about these cultures, when we talk about the grumpy bastard back in the corner, that just is mad every day, and I've worked with them too. It's like anything else in life. It's about whether you're a low-level leader as a supervisor or whether you're an administrator, it's all about expectations, right? It's about the expectations you set. If you walk into a housing unit and you got an officer working in there and those inmates are doing what they want, laundry's hanging off the wall, they've got their chairs pulled out, leaned back, watching the TV, that's the expectation that officer has for those inmates. And you walk in the next housing unit and it doesn't look like that. And that's because of the expectations. We have to, including those old grumpy people, we grab them by the collar, we pull them out of their comfortable grumpy place, and we set expectations for them, because they are a cancer.
Yeah.
They are a cancer in your agency.
Well, and the thing is not they're not just the cancer in the agency. I mean, yes, they will feed all of your problems, whether it becomes to, keep, maintaining a low level of retention, or, trying to increase morale. I mean, yes, you will have those that bring it down, but what people don't realize is the amount of power these individuals have, because as they start to infect your staff, your staff are now carrying all of that home, and now it's infecting their families. You said that stress, that constant workplace stress. And some of the ways that I tackled that was one individual behavior. The first one that I spoke about in the training was negative filtering. And, of course, there's a lot of ways you can go with negative filtering. And so I gave an example. I said, how many of you have ever been to a meeting where some change or some new laws have changed, or whether we got to pivot, change our policy, whatever we got to do?
Sure.
And that meeting was the most professional meeting I ever sat through. I mean, it was just put out. This is what we got to do. This is how we're going to do it. I'm dependent on you to make this happen and to present this to the next level down. And I remember going to briefings, and this is for over the years, and I would have that delivery completely change from what it was, because it was stained with opinion, because they didn't want to change. And so then they just spewed it to the staff, and it contaminated all of them. And then they were curious as to why it wasn't received well.
You're talking about the person who comes up and we've got to implement change, and they say, I don't want this either, but this is what central office or this is what whoever has said we have to do.
Right. And so by doing that, what you've done is you've established a line between your staff and your admin. And that's not okay. That's not how it was presented to you, but because you've put the opinion on it, and now your people who are a product of you see that it's not well received by you, so therefore it's not well received by them. Now that behavior is going to process into the next one, which is self-sabotaging behavior. And so when you look at the word sabotage versus self-sabotage, there is one big word that is not in self-sabotage, and that is my intent. See, if I set out to sabotage you, Mike, I'm setting out to make you look bad, probably essentially to make me look good. Okay?
Right.
Self-sabotage, which is common terms in the world of addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever your addiction.
Okay.
Well, this can also plague you in the workplace. So, for example, you take in that negative opinion and that message that was given to you to be passed to the line staff in the same manner and same intent that it was intended, you've now stained that. And so now that it's not well received, they're purposely going against the grain. They're purposely dragging their feet. They're purposely trying to make it fail. And then that's a reflection of who? The guy who had the negative filter. Who did I sabotage? Myself. But I don't realize I'm doing it because I think that I'm just making my point, or I'm so many times I hear in my people. Well, backing your people with negativity isn't really backing them.
Right.
You're not giving them an example to follow through on. Where if
leaning into them. I mean, if you've got to bring bad news, if you've got to bring change, if you've got to do that kind of stuff, you don't do it from this top down with a hammer.
No.
You go in there and you sit down with the people that you trust, the people that have influence inside your agency, your shift, whatever, and you talk to them about it. Well, how would you implement this? What does this look like to you? How can we make this work for everybody? Right. And then you let that flow back up. If you walk into meetings and that's the way you run stuff, which I've worked for them too, and we're going to do this and no more talking about it. I want to see this by next Thursday. You're not getting any buy-in. You have no influence, and it's going to fail. Yeah.
Well, and when we were going through those things, it was just funny to see the light bulbs go off. And I think that part of what made it well received was the fact that, I went into detail of how I was totally guilty of those things. How I this was not a matter of me just saying where everybody else is making these mistakes. I made these mistakes, and I was able to self-reflect and kind of change my thinking process and not assume the worst in others. Because that's the other thing where the sabotage comes in, is you're feeding that behavior of the assumption of the worst in people. So, for example, by saying, well, it's because these folks said so, not given the real, it could be the TCA changed. It could be that, the law says we can't do this anymore. We didn't want to say that. We want to put it off on an individual. Well, now all I'm doing is feeding that culture of, now they are assuming that this change is happening and it's personal, not professional.
Right.
And that's where that negative filtering, that's the form of cancer that toxic people spread constantly. And misery tends to love company. So that's why it grows at such a rapid rate.
Right.
Looking at the science behind it, it doesn't help that we are already predispositioned to lean towards the negative anyway. In some of our other trainings, when we start talking about, we do a de-escalation course that we adopted. And when you start talking about gaining and draining feelings, things that build you up and things that bring you at your lowest, it's amazing to see when people write out a whole list of those. About 98% of the time, when you ask them, how many of you have more draining than gaining? And they're all raising their hand. Well, then, of course, we have some videos from some doctors that we play, and it talks about how we are already wired to lean towards the negative. We actually have more negative responders in the brain than we do for the positive, which feeds all kinds of behavioral biases, like the negativity bias, the pessimistic, the hostile attribution, these things that commonly plague us in our field because we start spiraling down those behaviors before we end up either at the termination or the resignation.
Right.
And which is kind of what led into the beginning of that course. Remember, I told you we started with the one that addressed toxicity. I did a sequel to it that was for leadership and corrections. And then I did a prequel because I got a phone call. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The Creating Change class got such a response that I'm going to back up here just a sec. I went to an instructor development. And while I was there, I was able to just speak on about 5 minutes of any topic I wanted. And so I spoke for 5 minutes on that class. And I had multiple counties out of that class request the training. And so I'll tell you a real treat that I got out of that. I was there with a gentleman named Solomon Holly, great guy out of Davidson County. And he called me out of nowhere. And he said, Josh, he said, I've been talking with Heath Kane. And Heath Kane was one of my mentors, Mike, when I was 24.
Right.
He was my training instructor at 24, and he is still at it and doing great at it. Well, they asked me if I would come back to Davidson County and teach that class. And so me and my partner, we loaded up. We decided we were going to go present it as a team, and we did. And I remember walking in that room, and I looked out at Heath and his fellow staff. And I remember opening up. I think it was probably the most meaningful opening that I could give for that specific crew. And I looked at Heath and I said, 22 years ago, I gave you a real raw return on your investment in me, because when I left, I was the epitome of everything we're going to talk about in this training. I said, but I want to let you know that your investment wasn't lost. I just had to grow up a little bit to know what to do with it. And so I said, I hope this makes up for it,
Yeah.
And so we went into it. The response that we got was phenomenal. At that point, we started gifting it to other counties. Counties would send their FTOs to shadow us, and then I would send the material home with them. Let's take it. Let's kind of change this culture together. If we show people better ways to go about their daily and what their purpose is, then they should be able to walk out of here feeling a whole new level of fulfillment, because we're not focusing on all those things that feed the end demise, the statistics of wellness, And so when that started happening, I got a call from David E. Lola from Tennessee Corrections Institute.
Yep.
And he came out and shadowed the class in Montgomery County, and he presented it at the conference in Gatlinburg. And it did really well. And I remember the next year after that conference, he called me out of nowhere. And by now I've already done the leadership portion, and we've started running that for in-services, and we're getting really good response from that. He says, "What are you working on right now?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm working on a prequel to all of this."
Okay.
And he said, "Are you like done with it, or like kind of give me an idea of what it's on?" And so I told him, I said, "Well, I want to start from the beginning, from the very beginning. So from the day that someone hires in, the course is called My First Day. And that's the first section of this training going forward. And it focuses on the science as far as the breakdown of the brain, how, for example, the neocortex, the frontal lobe of the brain, which is what's in control of all your level of understanding and rationale and able to really interpret what's going on. You've got that section, then you've got your next section down, which is in charge of your emotions, your limbic system, where, they say, once you take a drink of alcohol, you can no longer think with that understanding portion of your brain. You're immediately in that emotional state. And then, of course, the smallest portion of your brain, which is the amygdala, where you are geared. This is the response for fight or flight. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, what people don't realize is from the moment that you step into those walls or step into any facility or whatever, that's where we spend 100% of our day in that smallest portion. We are always ready for things to pop off at any moment, anytime, any place, anywhere. Which is why when the things are hitting the fan, man, that's where we rock. That's where we perform our best, because that's what we know exactly how to handle that. The problem with that there's a whole lot of daily interaction and communication that has to take place with each other, and we're all in that mindset. And so our normal interaction can tend to come off very offensive and very transactional because you are in that state of mind where it's all business and we don't have time to focus in on the intent behind a colleague's actions or whatever. We just assume it's the worst. For example, and I always use this as a joke, for any of us who've ever worked any kind of control room, they're all the same. They're busy, especially at shift change. Let that phone ring during shift change. You'll hear them answer. It's like, "What do you want?" Just that immediate off interaction that they would have never responded that way any other time. And I use that one just as an example. But knowing that, so now let's add a little portion to that. If we know that this is where we're thinking 100% of the time, let's start looking at the breakdown of communication. So when you look at the breakdown model of communication, about 58% of our communication is received successfully through body language, okay, and interaction, all right? Then 37% is your voice and your tone, because you can tell my intent behind what I'm saying. But 7% is the words at face value. So now you look at the times as they've changed. How do we communicate across society? Email, text, Instagram, social media. This is how we interact. So the problem with that is that 7% success rate is now based on the mood of the reader. So now think, essentially, if you send out an email to, and I'll just say 50 people, you got 50 staff members, and they're all in that facility and they're rocking and rolling, doing their normal daily routine, and they're constantly in that state of fight or flight. Is it not understandable to see how they would misinterpret the intent behind an email when they're all reading it from that state of mind? No wonder we're getting all these different interpretations of it. And then you have arguments. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not going to be able to get rid of email and all these things that make communication easier, or at least more efficient in the level of how many people you can cover at one time. But it does mean that we have to make sure that the people that we task to translate that into the intended message that it is are
Right.
doing it without that negative filter, because when you know you're sending that in, we want to make sure that it's interpreted in the way it's intended.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's funny because, emojis have ruined us. I mean, I remember a time where I sent out an email and I was like, hey, I'm coming to pick this up on this day at this time. Please have everything buttoned up, ready to go. And I was getting phone calls going, man, why are you yelling at me over this thing? And I wasn't even typing in all caps.
Right.
So now I have to have fun with it. It's like, hey, this is not a nastygram.
Yeah.
LOL. Hope you're having a great day. Hey, just to let you know, while I'm making my rounds through, I'm going to come by. I need to pick these up. I got a deadline I got to meet, whatever. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Y'all are doing great. You have to add that additional in to mentally disarm the reader, because they are in that mode of business. And it's not that they assume that what you're saying is bad. It's that they don't really have a choice in the matter. They're focused on the mission. And this is something that's taken their mind off of that. And so we immediately beeline to deal with that as short, sweet as possible that we can, and then back to the mission.
Yeah.
That can be a problem in your daily interaction with folks.
Yeah.
And so while I was talking to him about that, he said, would you be willing to teach at a conference? And so Jackson and I, we collabed on this one. We sat down and we put in the work, and we started talking about those behavioral biases that people pick up. And the reason we went through that, focusing more on the behavioral, not so much the physical. A lot of time, whenever you ask the question in a classroom about biases, and you ask, a lot of times the class will lean on the physical. They'll talk about age, race, sex, all of those topics that are biases that people have.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm focusing more on behavioral. So when you ask that initially, they're kind of like, you kind of get crickets. And so then you start talking about like the negativity bias, as I mentioned earlier, or the pessimistic, the hostile attribution. And so when you talk about the negativity bias, one, it's so easy to fall into that, especially at the age that you are able to hire in at corrections. So for example, most corrections facilities that I've seen that don't carry a commission status hire in at 18. For those that do carry commission status, it's 21. Well, when you start asking people when they think that they develop their biases, a lot of the feedback I've gotten over the years is, well, during our childhood. And they're not wrong. You develop a lot of your biases based on how you were raised, who you were raised by, all these things. But when it comes to the behavioral side, it's a little bit different. So, for example, on the behavioral end, the average adult, and I say that adult, doesn't stop or is not fully developed in that frontal lobe, that neocortex. Some at the age of 29. Well, that's where a lot of those behaviors are picked up. So we've all heard the saying, I remember hearing it growing up when I was a kid. If you hang out with a rough crowd, you become the rough crowd, right?
Right.
Well, so can you imagine coming in at 18, 21 years old, and you enter a toxic culture, and then your daily interaction with inmate population is what's shaping your ability to reason and understand. And so essentially the negativity bias trains the mind. Basically, the feeling of loss, you feel that at so much higher a level than you do of all that you've gained. So essentially, like I give a visual, it's like it's got this guy with this wheelbarrow, and it's full to the rim of all these things that he has in this wheelbarrow. And then he looks over and he sees the one thing on the other side that he doesn't have, and it makes him mad. And we joke on the gun range, because I tell all my officers, I'm like, I see it every time you get out there. You'll have a grouping this big, and one round will be down here. And man, they're so frustrated with that one round because they didn't pull that one into the rest. And
so if you're a new officer and you feel like you're in this toxic culture, what's some of the stuff you can do? I mean, how do they avoid this?
So one, the training initially is that of what it is. It is a red flag training. These are behaviors now that we've talked about, we've discussed. So one is now you know how to recognize it. The whole point of that was, I remember years ago, and I asked this even at a facility I worked at before. I used to ask them, when you hire people in, what are you telling them? And they're like, well, we tell them all the things that they can accomplish with hard work and, make sure they show up on time, be ready to just take on anything, be a solution to your supervisor's problems. I'm like,
Okay.
that's awesome. But what are you telling them about the daily interaction? And it's, well, we didn't want to run them off. And I'm like, so they feel like they're lied to. So let's be transparent about it. Hey, this is what you're signing on for. And these are the behaviors that can either make or break you. Let's talk about the ones that break. And then if you start to find yourself spiraling, here's some ways that you can actually get yourself on the right track. And that's
what are some of those ways? I mean,
well, one initially is to first let them know, surround yourself with people that are for you.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
People who feed advice with things that end success are not people who are for you.
Right.
People who remind you of why you matter and what the end result of your goal is and how you'll never meet it because nobody ever won anything throwing in the towel. That's step one. Step two, if you start falling into this, and it usually starts to happen when we start to make mistakes, or maybe we get ourselves in a little bit of trouble. Maybe we did something, maybe we cut some corners somewhere we shouldn't have, and now they're having to, reprimand me or verbal counsel, all of those things that kind of come with this.
Okay.
Instead of sitting there and self-criticizing, and we go over in depth of self-criticism and why that is the common mindset of corrections, we then show them a path of how to self-reflect, of how to actually look at what your part of this issue was. And instead of just making this, because I never think that disciplinary action should be a point of discipline. I think it should be a point of education. Yes, we have to do this to acknowledge the mistake made, but we're going to end this on the path to get you right.
Hopefully.
Exactly. And if you pave that path, one, you eliminate the possibility of them thinking it was personal because now you're there for their benefit. You still addressed the problem. You still did it with the way that you had to do it. But then you have to give them a path to self-reflect. A lot of people don't know how to self-reflect. And there's so many steps in that. Some of them are, to one, take a break from the circumstances, because when you initially get primed or when you feel threatened, you're already in that state of fight or flight. So at that point, you start to go into an overload. And so that's where we've seen people get so mad or frustrated, they just can't even function. You're having to walk them outside, let them get a cigarette or whatever a Coke or whatever it is that their vice is to kind of wind down. If you know that this is how people are going to respond, we have to teach them how to not focus on exaggerated thoughts. I give a prime example. I had a deputy call me one day, and they said, I need to speak to a lieutenant right now, right this very second. And I said, okay, well, hold on now. I said, have you had a chance to talk to your shift commander? No. I said, okay. Are you going to? Do they get a chance? I mean, because I'm not your shift commander, but you confide in me. And so I want to make sure I steer you the right way. So they're not even going to get a shot at this. I said, what does this have to do with? Is this with the shift commander? No, with a corporal. I said, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Have you had a conversation with the corporal? No, because whenever I did, he had that look on his face like, just get the heck out of my face, new guy. And I said, well, wait. I said, wait a minute. Did he say that to you? Well, no, but that's what his face said. I said, wait a minute. Did you just give this person a my face status? Are you kidding me? Just look at the mood and we just go ahead like his Facebook and put an emoji there and they're angsty today.
Right.
So I said, look, here's what you need to do. One, go home. Whenever you get home, at the end of your shift, take a night to process this. The next day, I want you to go to that leader and I want you to have a conversation. And I want you to tell them what you feel their delivery of whatever information was that got you to this point, how that impacted you. And I think you'll be surprised at their response. And so they did. They go and talk to them, and they came back to me and they said that was the best advice ever. Everything that I thought was the intent behind the message had nothing to do with everything that I added to it. And it was a means of encouraging that professional conflict where there's nothing personal. A lot of people think that conflict is not a good thing. Professional conflict is a good thing. It's how we solve
Absolutely.
problems.
Sure it is.
And so teaching these folks how to have that, because, communication across society doesn't encourage it. We communicate via thread or whatever posting I'm putting, and there's not really a whole lot of accountability. So when you start putting people in an area that they have to interact with each other, a lot of times with our younger deputies, they'll just recede back. They won't even interact. And some of them would rather quit because that's not being taught. And it's like, well, wait a minute, let's encourage it. Wow. That's how you're going to get to the bottom of this. And then we can put it behind us and move on to the next one. And so there's a whole 7-step process in transitioning from self-criticism to self-reflection. And then starting to focus on the things now and behaviors that build each other on a daily basis, like embracing each other's goals. Somebody comes to you and they say, for example, I used to hear it all the time when I was just a deputy. Deputy come in and I'd say, hey, what's your goal? I want to be patrol one day. Well, sweet. Let me show you how to get there. This is the mindset. Be where your feet are. Come in, be the best at this job. And that's what's going to scream about your performance when it comes time for you to move on to other things, as opposed to what I used to hear back in 01, 02, and all the way up until even the last few years. Some people were like, well, you'll never get there. I've been doing this 15 years. I didn't get there. Yeah. Well, also, but that person's not saying that they tried either. They didn't.
Sure.
If you tried, the laws of physics will tell you, as long as I keep moving in this direction, I'm eventually going to get there.
Right.
One of these days. And so just kind of teaching folks how to pivot that. Some of the other things too, people aren't interruptions. They're individuals that are seeking knowledge, and they can be, they can actually present opportunities to make some really good changes. So be available,
Right.
When these folks want to come interact and they come with initial issues or complaints, let's get them on the right track of that, because in the name of venting, if all you do is vent and there's never a solution involved, well, then is that really healthy?
Right.
You're not getting anything. No, because you're dwelling. You're dwelling in that process. And so talking about how to vent with a solution, because one thing I learned from being a leader is sometimes the best solution is that of the boots on the ground, because they are interacting on a regular basis. And so make sure that we're available. Make sure that they have the opportunity to interact in a healthy manner that actually feeds success.
Yeah, as a leader, if the only voice you're listening to is your own, you're not leading.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not leading. Yeah.
And there's so many things that can be said to that. I always told people, when I would interact, and whether it be even just to sit down for 10 minutes and have a conversation about whatever it is that's on their mind. One of the things that I would hear is, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about that. Or, I've talked to other people and nobody's given me that advice. And I was like, and I said, then what does that say for who you surround yourself with? Go seek answers, fact find from people are going to feed you the information you need to gear you for success.
Yeah.
And if you do that, if you seek it, and that's how you get in front of that rumor mill of corrections. I tell people all the time, I am a rumor killer.
Right.
You hear something that sounds conspiracy theorish because now they're crossing over into that hostile attribution bias. That's what that mindset takes you. Everything becomes conspiracy.
Right.
And it takes away your ability to enjoy even each other's success. So somebody gets promoted. Oh, they only got that because they know this, or they only got that because of this. Well, no, they got it because it was their time and they worked really hard. But we're allowing that mindset, that hostile attribution bias, to just sabotage us. And then that becomes our reputation. And then we wonder why nobody wants to touch us.
Yeah.
how come they're not picking me? Probably because of the attitude I'm emulating, that I'm pushing out,
yeah, yeah,
you know?
yeah. I
So,
learned pretty early on watching when people didn't get promoted.
mhm.
You find out more about that person and the supervisor they'll be on how they handle the rejection than you ever will on finding, when they
Absolutely.
get promoted or accepted.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
100%. And it blows my mind how people act differently. Like so some of the feedback that we got just from colleagues and then individuals that taught this at their agency was the ability to attempt to apply this to their lives. So they're actually taking active steps in how they interact. And so, for example, when I see colleagues they'll say something that's very conspiracy-ish, and then you'll see one of the others jump in and say, you know what? I don't think when that person woke up this morning and made that policy change, I don't think while they were eating their eggs and bacon this morning that they said, oh, they can't wait to tick you off with this policy change. I think that's, and you know what, and to see them go, my gosh, like you catch yourself and you start to make those active changes. And
That's good culture.
yeah, absolutely.
That's good culture to see that kind of stuff happening. Yeah.
And so I had a old colleague of mine, Josh Barber, love him to death. Me and Josh worked together at the prison 22 years ago. And, he now works for another agency, but he came and took that training to his agency. He came down to Montgomery and sat through it. He loved it, took it back. And then he shot me a message not too long ago that said that went down as the favorite course of that year's in-service.
Good.
And that they really received it. And I knew if anybody could really sell it, he's got the ability to just really interact well. And so
tell me what's going on with the training now. I know you've kind of broadened its scope recently, so tell me about that.
Yes. So it got a lot of exposure. So I had the recent, well, I won't say recent now because it's been quite a bit of time, but I guess about a year ago, I interacted with a company called Arc Tactical. I went to one of their trainings at another agency. It was a de-escalation course, and it was phenomenal. A week-long de-escalation specific for corrections.
Was it Tim?
It was Tim and Ian.
Or Ian, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
we had Tim on here, episode 105.
Okay.
Yeah, he was on the podcast here with Arc Tactical. So,
okay.
Yeah, great instructor.
So I tell you, I was blown away at their ability to interact. A lot of folks that we get hyped up on all that physical training, where de-escalation falls right down that behavior category that I really, really just enjoy. And I was so blown away at their professionalism and how they interacted. I thought, you know what? I want to see some of the other courses they had to offer. And so I did. I looked at them, and we ended up having an event where I got to interact with Tim a little more and his colleague, his director of operations for the West Coast, Tim Higgins. And there was just a real click there. I got to kind of sit and brainstorm with him, and I was telling him about this training, and he was just really into it. Of course, we had a lot of time that we were able to kind of discuss that. We had a Zoom over it. We discussed it in detail. I sent him a full-blown synopsis on it, full lesson plan breakdown, because it includes tabletop exercises. It gets people interacting with each other. You want those generations communicating. And we're also doing it. There are very many times that it's quite humorous because we love to laugh at our own behaviors. But to see them interact that well, and he said, I love this course. And he asked me what I thought. He said, how would you like to launch this? And we'll send it across the country. And I said, Tim, nothing would make me happier in the world. My goal out of this is I want young people coming into this field and people that are in, because that's the beautiful thing about the training, is it addresses new, existing leadership. All three categories, all areas of your career from beginning to end. Right. And then how to not take it home, and ways to, if you start seeing this in your home, some ways that you can transition that out. Okay. And so I said, so if I can save them some of the grief and mistakes that I made over the year that I think really kind of robbed me of the experience because I didn't know how to process what was happening. If
Right.
we can give them that on a proactive approach and start seeing the response, then we're giving them the tools to change that culture themselves as they move into those positions. And when you look at the end result, you're bettering your communication amongst your staff because we're getting a better understanding from all those generational perspectives because
Okay.
we talk about all those things during those trainings. So it's interesting when you start getting multiple generations in and we start talking about the things about other generations that we find troubling. And in reality, you start to see a real similarity when you start actually putting those things to paper. And so anyway, they picked it up. And then on top of that, they've brought me on as a master instructor with them. And I'm going to start moving forward with them. And we're going to try to, change the culture of corrections from all facets,
Great.
from your mental to your physical. We want to be able to just go across the world. And right now we're in several states and a few countries.
Cool. So I'll put the link to ARC Tactical on here in the show notes. Make sure that everybody can get there. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me via phone or via email. I'll be happy to give both. My email is josh@arctac.net.
Okay.
And then my phone number is 931-624-4444. Easiest phone number ever.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll get that put in the show notes. If you were going to recommend a book, if you could think of a book out there that somebody needed to read that might give them heads up on some of this, have you got one right off the top of your head?
Oh, my goodness. You would
Something
put
that
me
meant
on the
something
spot.
to you when you were reading?
Well, there was one recently that I've read. We've been really focused on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's some books out there, but there was one that I didn't think that I would care for until I read it. And then I realized, wait a minute, that's actually a really good book as far as for the foundations of leadership. And so, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That was
Great one.
That was a great book. I really enjoyed the read. That was the last book that I read about 2 months ago.
Right.
So that was a really good one as far as team building and,
Sure.
how to go about that.
And he writes, all of his books are written, and I can't think of his name right now. I'll put it in the show notes, but all of his books are written from like the point of view of a story.
Yes.
To lead you through. So it's kind of interesting. It's not just reading and regurgitating. It's actually a story that has a moral or a purpose,
yes.
As you get through it. So,
well, and I enjoyed the fact too, that it, in dealing with that team that they were trying to build and reshape, there was every type of employee on that team. And
right.
just the ways that they dealt and interacted with each individual, and every one of them was handled differently, which really, the fact it wasn't a mass dealing with. So, for example, they were dealing with this one individual. Everybody didn't feel that blowback. That was an immediate correction on this individual away from everybody else. And they were solving problems. And I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a great read.
I'll get that book put in there if anybody wants to take a look and link that. Well, thanks, Josh. Thanks for stopping by the Prison Officer Podcast. I appreciate it. It's a good conversation.
Absolutely, Mike. I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Anytime. I will talk at you later, and have a great night.
All right, brother. You too.
Hey, before we go, I'd like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. Omni Real-Time Locating System is a company I've been working closely with for years. I'm proud to be a part of this innovative team that's developed the best real-time locating system on the market today for your jail or prison. Omni's PREA-compliant real-time monitoring technology is the very best way to track and record your inmates' locations, their movements, their interactions throughout every square inch of your correctional facility. Imagine getting an alarm the second an escape happens, or an alert that lets you know when an inmate's heart rate drops below a set level. To learn more about Omni, go to www.omnirtls.com. That's omnirtls.com. Or you can click on today's show notes to get in the information guide. Omni Real-Time Locating System is a powerful tool specifically designed for the modern correctional professional. If you haven't done so, please take a moment to like my podcast, or better yet, hit the subscribe button so that you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. Thanks for listening, and let's be safe out there. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.